Checklist.io.
Welcome everybody on Food for Thought with Karabo&Conce. We're so happy to be back, and on today's episode we are sitting with the one and only Wandile Sihlobo, the Chief Economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, and also an agricultural economist and author of Finding Common Ground, Land, Equity and Agriculture. Wandile, welcome.
Finally, I got the invitation.
Listen,
I've been
I
waiting.
had to.
I've been waiting.
You're a hot man to find.
I've been waiting and seeing all of the great content and great conversation and saying, when am I getting the invite? But thank you.
And thank you for taking time off your busy schedule. Be honored.
Not busy at all. Not busy. Busy reading.
Busy reading.
But good to be in conversation with.
And you're busy writing, right? So Wandile, there's a lot happening right now in the global agricultural market, actually in the global market itself, and agriculture is at the core of it because Russia and Ukraine are one of the major global exporters of grains and oilseeds, and that impacts the South African agricultural sector. So can you just talk about it a bit and tell our audience, what that actually means?
Yeah, I mean, this is an important point that you raise, and because that's one of the things that I've been monitoring closely over the past couple of days. Because as you both know, Russia and Ukraine are important players in global grain markets in general. Mm-hmm. Even if you were to just look from an exports perspective to say what exactly do they mean? I mean, these are countries that are exporting about 26% of global wheat, nearly 30% of global barley, nearly 60% of global sunflower oil. Mm-hmm. So when there are issues like what is happening now, even before there was a disruption, a physical bombing, anxiety and the fear in the market already started to move prices, which is why even the piece you were referring to, saying on writing, was actually just trying to make sense of what does all of that mean for the world market, for Africa, and also for South Africa. So it's a major challenge.
So apart from mainly grains and oilseeds, as a South African, I saw that we export about 8% of our soft citrus to Russia. So how is the normal South African impacted, apart from the grains and oilseeds?
Yeah, I mean, for normal South Africans, the impact of the Russia-Ukraine, in as far as the food industry is concerned, it comes on in various channels. Firstly, if you are a consumer, I think in the near term, you see this through prices beyond the grains and the oilseeds, but just the entire food space. You will see the price surge, or probably within the next 2 or 3 months, because the other important thing that we have to be cognizant of is the fact that the oil market is affected. We transport roughly over 70% of our food by road, so that those effects will be there. But I think then on the exports point, which you are raising, is an important one. And some of Agbiz members and the others are actually worried about that. Because roughly now we are heading towards the peak season of the citrus export.
Yeah. Yes.
And we also have about 12% of apples and pears that gets to be exported to Russia. So that's the major issue. But I think as a closing point into this stuff, it's also the point about the fertilizer industry, which is the major one, because Russia is a lead exporter on that.
Yes, I mean, the fertilizer, we were already seeing soaring prices before this disruption. So this could mean higher prices even going into the season. The wheat producers are going into their planting season starting now in April. So it's going to be a more production cost pressure on our producers to produce wheat. And I don't know if you've ever had a conversation lately with any of those guys, but what does this even mean for our wheat producers? Will they produce less? I mean, we were already importing so much.
I don't think there's really even a way out of this. And you put it right, because the issue is you have higher fuel prices, and also remembering that fuel makes up about 13% or so of your production cost. Then you have this fertilizer, which makes up 35% of your cost. And if all of these are doubling or increasing at a double-digit rate, so it's going to be tough. But I don't think they will reduce the area planting. But it does mean, though, that the fact that the past seasons were better, we got better yields, that assists somewhat. and also the fact that commodity prices are higher, it does slightly offset some of the costs. But I think there's always going to be a temptation of saying grain prices are higher, then farmers should be doing well. But it cancels off when you consider the inputs.
And also at the beginning of the season, we saw December, January characterized by excessive rainfall. And as a result, we saw some farmers on the ground, a bit struggling. Some couldn't actually get onto the ground to plant, and some of the crops were actually damaged. So talking about wheat now, do you anticipate that, some of those guys who couldn't actually go in and plant this summer crop are going to switch to wheat? What is the expectation in terms of that?
I think actually, Karabo, we might see in the Free State a bit of an increase on wood planting. You are right on that. And what will help a lot is the fact that the soil moisture is also really good. Then the guys will be able to increase the planting in there. But in the Cape, I generally think that we will see fairly good area. Where we might not see a solid recovery is on the barley plantings, because I think that we are still having a good stocks that we're leaning on. From the back of the last season bans in alcohol sales and everything else that had happened. But generally, I think the outlook is going to be positive in as far as production conditions.
Okay.
And Wandile, when we're talking wheat, like I said, we are importing a lot. How reliant are we on Ukraine and Russia, those regions? Are we going to maybe have a supply concerns going into the season? Will bread prices possibly be increasing because there's there's tight supplies?
I think it's an important issue that we are raising, because some people are obviously worried now to say, when they see wheat, does this have bread implications or anything like that? But I think we're not there. We're not there in a sense that generally countries would make sure that there's a 3-month stock that they always running with, which then assists to an extent. But what we worried about with the war in Ukraine is for how long will it last and the severity of the damage on the infrastructure there. As far as our imports, Karabo will know, we've looked at this in the past, we're importing about half of what we produce, 1.5 million tons of wheat. We're reliant on the EU, good quality wheat coming out of the EU, Canada, and Australia. The Black Sea is not that big of a chunk, the Black Sea, Russia as well as Ukraine. So I think we will be comfortable, but not to underestimate the point we made at the start, that they are producing about nearly 30%, they are exporting about nearly 30% of global wheat. So knocking that off, it has implications for prices.
So overall, talking about prices, guys, I'm getting chest pains.
You're already thinking about your budget end of March.
Exactly, and I hope the answer to this one will be no. So Wandile, talking about all of these price increases, we saw that electricity has gone up. Fuel prices are choking us currently. Fertilizer, like we were saying, prices will be impacted. Like the trend from the previous year was very bullish, and we don't expect that to change anytime soon. So as consumers, are we expected to now pay more for food going forward? What is the sense? I know that you said we have to wait a bit more to see what the actual impact of the Russia-Ukraine war is. But with everything else that's happening domestically, what can we expect?
I mean, you're right. We are already feeling some price pressures. And even if you just look at the headline number of food price inflation, because we talked about this, you have food price inflation last year averaging at about 6.5%. This year, though, at Agbiz, we had thought that we will see food price inflation moderating to be somewhere 4 to 5% price range. But now, Karabo, with these new risks that you've just listed, we're beginning to look at that number with a sense that we might have to revise it up. So all in all, there are more upside risk on prices for consumers. Will they hit the consumer? And when? Those are pricing decisions, because remember, the food companies are also sensitive to the fact that consumers are under pressure. Absolutely. Some of the costs they might absorb, some they might not be able, and that's what we will be watching.
I totally agree, guys. If you missed the video on how to save money while spending, please just go back to one of our videos and catch up on that.
Yeah, we did a very nice video in January following seasonal trends. If you haven't seen it, Wandile, you know which foods to buy, which not to buy, and
definitely
touching
check that
on
out.
food price inflation and the seasonal trends, basically. Just guiding the people,
Definitely.
save a buck.
And just to break it down to, on a layman's term, food inflation will actually refer to like how much more you have to pay compared to a previous year for the same product.
So, Wandile, we had the SONA address a few weeks ago, and the president did talk a lot about agriculture and growing, employment in the sector and what it means to actually be involved. And there are some reforms and programs in place. Can you just tell our viewers a bit about that? I know you're involved in some of these programs.
I think the major thing, Conce, that we are all just trying to solve in South Africa is the fact that we have a triple challenges that are facing the country: higher unemployment, low growth, as well as the issue of inequality. And I think in the conceptualization of the SONA and even just the economic reconstruction in general from the shock of COVID was to say which sectors of the economy can help us solve these issues. And not everyone was fortunate to go to universities, have degrees, and then go to high-tech jobs. Somebody has to go in agricultural related employment, and which is why then agriculture has featured more lately, the SONA and the other speeches that the government has given out. So the bottom goal is to say, how do you expand agriculture? And also, how do you ensure that you focus on labor-intensive subsectors of agriculture for those employment opportunities?
And seeing that you're also very actively involved in terms of policies around agriculture, etc., would you say the policies are actually favorable for those people who were previously maybe excluded, who are interested to come into the agricultural space? Because we often get a lot of interest, and that's why we created this platform, from young people who say they know nothing about agriculture, but they want to actually be involved in agriculture, but there is a whole list of challenges. So in terms of the policy side of things, what are you guys maybe busy doing to make sure that those guys are catered for?
I think you are right in a sense that we were not always clear about, if you are a young black person, how do you get into agriculture? But of late, I think we managed, you will remember, Karabo, we had what was called the Land Reform Expert Panel, where we thought about how do you accelerate land reform? How do you clarify beneficiary selection criteria? Who gets to benefit on land redistribution? Do you just have to be black, or is there some criteria that you have to get into? And then those were all clarified, and young people, women, are amongst those that are actually favored in that process. So right now, then the government has that, is called land beneficiary selection criteria, and then a whole range then of support systems that might follow. But what will be instrumental going forward is what is called the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan, which then brings private sector, brings public sector, look at the available resources and say, how do you do joint venture, select the right beneficiaries, and then you help those drive. So that's the focus.
Totally, because in the past, the average, we've always said the average age of a farmer is like 65. So, how do we turn, we've always, had this, how do you turn this industry, from actually duckling to being a cute, and beautiful industry.
Yeah, something attractive to go into. Speaking of attractive things to get into, the president actually mentioned industrialization of cannabis.
Absolutely.
Yes, during the SONA address. And that is also very vague. I mean, can I start growing my little patch in my backyard and try and sell it? What channels are they? What are the requirements? What is the selection criteria to get into the market? What are we looking at? What's the scope?
I mean, I think already they're growing in their own usage in South Africa. Since the judgment a couple of years ago, that is already legal. Somebody can do that and grow for own consumption. But in as far as trade, I mean, there's still some barriers on licensing, and also the value chains of the processing are not yet fully developed. But it's encouraging to see it at a national level being tabled by the president, because what the president's words are policy messaging. Then the departments take that and they go back and they begin to say, how do we put processes in place? There's a cannabis master plan that is in place, beginning to clarify legislative work, costs of entering or starting business into this. But now what will need to be done is clear communication of all of this so that people can know what will happen. My preference is actually saying, go to provinces with high unemployment, potential for growing, and try to incentivize value chain creation from there, and then production could feed in.
I think, Wandile, we will definitely have to come back and do a whole another level segment, especially in terms of cannabis, the master plan that you're talking about. Moving forward, how long do we have to wait for this master plan to be, finalized? And we have a lot of questions. Are small-scale farmers, will they be able to tap into this space? Or because it's actually very capital intensive, will it be only people with a whole lot of money, who can actually be tapping into this space, especially also considering the fact that it's a heavily regulated sector. There's a whole lot of regulation and legislation.
Artlist.io